Yes, indeed, I identify as a European, and I would say the longer, the more in my life. Of course, I'm German. I'm most familiar with my German home country, with my history, etc. But the greater Europe is what formed me as a person also when I grew older. And I got used to that Europe is organized in total. Even there are big differences between Sicily and Berlin, for instance. But our daily life is organized together. We share many regulations. We have joint parliamentarians who fight for our interests in Brussels, and we have a continent or part of a continent without any borders, and that shaped also how I identify as a European. And for instance, when I'm here in New York, where I live in the moment, I'm closer to my European colleagues than to other colleagues. That's natural. This is a difficult question, and I was thinking about this much longer than I thought. And I realized there was no epiphany, European epiphany for me. I grew up in East Germany. So for me, looking at Europe was more an imaginary dream, going to France, to Spain, to Italy, to see what belongs to Europe. But it was not part of my life. My life was on the other side of the Iron Curtain, and Europe was, if I thought about Europe at all, more the Eastern Bloc, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania. But we didn't feel close like we do today as Germans and Italians and Romanians. But I remember I felt, I was angry when my friends or relatives in the West talked about Europe, and they meant the European Union, and forgot that Europe was much bigger than just the European Union. And so maybe this was a process to approach Europe as my home continent. And so when I felt for the first time the big freedom of Europe, it was not so much the fall of the Berlin Wall. This was the freedom in Germany and to see my friends in West Berlin and in West Germany. But this was my first trip outside of Germany to the West. My first trip was to France in the summer of 1990. And I realized, yes, this is the Europe I was dreaming of. And if you want, this was the first time I realized physically, basically, that Europe is much more than Germany and that we belong together. I'm not sure if there was a real European narrative in East Germany. It was more the narrative of the Eastern Bloc, ruled by Moscow, which was part of Europe. And so you couldn't claim that the Middle Eastern countries are Europe. So Europe didn't play that big role in East Germany, in the school where I went to. And probably it was more that they fought against Europe because Europe, the European Union, was the West and it was the enemy. So actually, I don't remember a real European narrative. Personally, for me, the worst moment in European history of the last decades was the war in Yugoslavia. It was unthinkable that after the end of the Second World War, there could be a war in Europe again. And then we saw that neighbors, friends of decades went against in a civil war, in a real war. They expelled their neighbors, they killed each other. That was devastating. And it was, for Europe, a very dark moment of the last decades. Since I grew up in East Germany and I enjoyed becoming a part of the European Union immediately after reunification in 1990, for me, the best moment of the last decades in European history was the big enlargement of the EU in 2004, when most of the Eastern Bloc, former communist countries from Estonia to Hungary and later Bulgaria and Romania joined the European Union. That was really a moment when you could feel and see on the map that Europe reunited and became bigger and bigger. And I remember this moment very well and the happiness that this was possible. It broadened my view and it broadened my physical ability to experience the world. So for me, really, Europe is the broad continent of freedom, of togetherness. And so it taught me also to look further than just a national perspective. And so I'm very grateful that I can say I'm a European. I enjoy a great freedom. I enjoy the rule of law and democracy in a continent which was in weapons two generations ago. I would like to see Europe as a strong, self-confident, determined entity in the world policy. Close ties to our transatlantic partners in Northern America and democratic countries all over the world to defend democracy, human rights, the rule of law, fair trade, and a continent which is able to influence world policies in a way which serves the people of not only the European countries, but in the world.